And good evening. This is the Tech Travel Geeks Podcast. It's episode 12, and as usual, I'm your host, Matteo from. Whoops. And I'm Matteo, Chief Mobile Opinionist from Tech Travel Geeks. So I'm afraid Lukasz couldn't join us this evening. He's otherwise engaged. So I will be doing a bit of multitasking. I'll host the podcast. I'll try and handle chat on my Microsoft Surface Go, which is sitting next to me, and also have a good chat with our guest. Please welcome to the Tech Travel Geeks podcast, one of the hosts of the BYOD Podcast, Nati Shochat. Hello, Nati. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Matteo, and thank you for having me.
So I've been a guest on Nati and Greg's podcasts recently. We've already had Greg on the Tech Travel Geeks podcast, but I think it was time to have Nati along, especially considering the news that was happening this week in the fruity side of the world.
You can say that again, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's start off by introducing Nati. Nati, tell us about yourself. Who is Nati Shochat?
All right. I'm Nati. It's a shortcut for Nathan, basically, which is a more easy pronounceable name for people who live outside of Israel, which is where I reside. The so-called startup nation. And we can talk about why it's so called, basically. What I do, I'm a product manager at a startup, not a startup, but we can call it a startup company, which resides up in the north of Israel, one of quite few tech companies that north in Israel. Most of the tech in Israel and labor as a whole is in the center. Most people know Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and those cities. And this is what I do. I'm a product manager, also a tech geek, basically. I love tech news from, mostly I'm an Apple user, but as part of my job, I use Android, Windows phones even.
Wow.
The few that are still there because we need to test the products on them.
Yeah. So just to give our users a bit of context, the job title product manager is something that can be interpreted in many ways. Mm-hmm. What's your definition of a product manager?
All right. So my definition of a product manager, it's you've hit the nail in the head. It's quite broad, but there are a lot of ways to look at it. The way that I'm looking at it is I'm a technical product manager, basically, and I'm not solely responsible of the roadmap of the products and the features in our product. Basically, I gather some feature requests and ideas from all kinds of verticals in our company. And what I do, I try to make those requests as technical as possible in the form of PRDs, and then manage the development of those features or functionalities in the product. Working with developer teams and also synchronizing between the business side of the business and the development side of the business, which is those two sides usually don't speak the same language. So luckily for me, I have in my past I was electronic engineering. I have a degree, and then I studied an MBA in information systems. So this is all of my reference and studies and my experience put me somewhere in the crossroad between the business side and the development side. So this is where I'm centered, basically.
So your job title is product manager.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could have a great conversation about the overlaps in the Venn diagram between a product manager and a technical product owner.
Right.
But we'll leave that for the This Week in Agile podcast or something like that.
Definitely. Yeah, I had an idea a few weeks ago, perhaps to do like there is a podcast from a good friend of mine, Guy Rambo. I think a lot of people know him from Twitter, and he has a very good podcast with his good colleague John Sandel, and they're talking and looking at the news and tech from developer point of view. And I had a thought, why not doing but from a product manager point of view, which could be quite interesting because products are everywhere, and you can see every product manager, when he sees like a new gadget or something, must have some opinion of the choices that were made and what is the pros and cons and how things probably got, I don't know, done in that way until the product actually came to be. So yeah, perhaps we can think of something like This Week in Agile Product Management
yes.
podcast.
I love the idea, and it's something I often do myself, is when a new product is released or when you get your hands on a new product, you, in a way, reverse product manage how this product came to be. And that's a great way of exercising your mind to think like the people who had to make those difficult trade-off decisions.
Definitely. And I think a lot of, once you start to view this world and actual products that are coming to this world, you start to be a bit more objective, because even though you really hate some feature or you really love some feature, you really understand, or you get more sympathetic about how actually they made this awful choice that was made, and you just bang your head and scream at the, I don't know, YouTube channel, the reviewer, no, how did they do that? But deep down inside, you know, well, yeah, it's not easy to make these choices.
It's always difficult making those choices, and that's why product managers are the people who both take the praise and responsibility for what happens in the product space.
Oh, definitely.
That's great. So you mentioned that you have a background in electronic engineering, and you then did an MBA. Would you like to share more about how you got into electronic engineering?
Yeah, well, when I studied in high school, we had this course that was my class in high school was electronic oriented. So we had like, it was this type of high school where you actually got some sort of actual training, practical training in some area of work. We had like classes with biology and software, and I was in the class of electronic engineering. And we had an option before going to the army. Here in Israel, the army is compulsory. We had an option to continue studying for 2 more years for an engineering degree, not an actual. It's an engineering degree, but it's not a full 4 years of B science engineering. It's something in between, and then in the army you can get more practice, and then you go out after the army and you get a job because you have both the degree and some experience. So this is what I did, and then I studied for two more years. It was quite interesting. But then after the army, and in the army, I did some pivot. I decided to be a combat soldier from some crazy reason. And and after that, I decided not to continue in electronic engineering because I found it as a work too boring, and to do something that is a bit more, I don't know, to me, I found a bit more interesting in industrial engineering. And then I decided to drop the engineering part of it because I didn't like physics. So I just kept with information systems. And that's how I ended up with all of these complex degrees and studying.
Very good. So that's a very interesting path you had to product management.
Yeah.
And the startup, the company you work for, what sort of products do they make? What products do they bring to market?
Basically, we have three groups inside of the company. I'm part of a group which makes all kinds of mobile applications and games, social games in part, but not only. So what I'm doing, I'm managing and helping the products in the form of features inside of applications, and whether it's new types of applications. We recently had a very nice endeavor with Facebook Instant Games, which Facebook pushed quite hard, and it was interesting. I also had the opportunity to travel to London, which I couldn't meet Greg from some reason. It just didn't sort out. So yeah, we're developing software and mostly applications, and it's very interesting because software eats the world.
Yes, I completely agree. Now, the funny thing is, you say you didn't manage to meet up with Greg. Greg's on the YouTube chat at the moment, and he's actually said that he thinks this is the first time he's ever seen Nati. So you're welcome, Greg. There's Nati. And you can see that he does have a proper microphone. It's not just his MacBook Air.
Yeah, no. Greg loves my microphone. He always tells me that I have a very good microphone, even though it's not the most expensive one. But I did some very nice rigging here, so we'll have a good equipment for our podcast. We started with a Beat Studio headphones as my equipment, and it was lousy. So I decided to put the money in and get a decent equipment.
Yes, you're definitely one of the best sounding guests we've had on the podcast so far. And I would argue you also have one of the best internet connections by the looks of things.
Greg can probably say something in the chat. We recently moved into a new house in May, and we have a fiber optics internet here that comes straight into our household, which is like crazy fast. And usually when we're finishing the podcast, I'm uploading the sound file even before we finish stopping the record button. So yeah, the internet here is quite good, definitely.
So you have fiber to the premises, which is a bit of a dream for many.
Yeah.
And I take it good bandwidth. What sort of connection speeds do you have?
I think we have the upload speed. Last time I checked, it's about 100 megabytes. Yeah, and the download and the upload is something like 25 megabytes, which is quite nice. And what I did, I covered the house with some Orbi routers. I have just a few days ago, I bought another extender which plugs just into the wall, which is really nice, and doesn't sit on the floor or something, which is quite annoying. So I have a router and 2 satellites of the Orbi, and it covers the house quite nicely. So yeah.
So a proper geek home connection setup.
Definitely. Now I just need some smart appliances, and the Chinese can spy on my house properly.
Well, as you say spying, I like to think of it as a remote redundant backup, which you'll be able to get through a Freedom of Information request in about 20 years' time.
Yeah, definitely. I just need to learn some Chinese, in Chinese, how to say, "Can I get my data, please?"
So yes, that's one of the benefits of being a proper geek in this unregulated, often growing and arguably immature market of data. We won't go into that too much at the moment. So you mentioned that you traveled to London recently. Do you travel for work, visiting clients or other offsites?
Yeah, our development team sits in East Europe, in Belarus, and in Minsk. So I traveled there every few months to have a proper meeting with them, face to face, be part of the QA process for some really big features that we try to launch, and to be a bit hands-on with them. Before that, I traveled a few times when we were consulting to a company in Georgia. And I don't know, perhaps 2 years ago, again, we had a very big client in South Africa. So I had like a very long flight there. So yeah, in general, I fly every 3 to 4 months.
Wow, that's quite a lot. And when you travel, this is obviously for business. Do you travel for pleasure, to go on vacation as well?
Oh yeah. Last vacation that we had was in Budapest. Me and my wife. It was during the construction of the house. We just said enough is enough. We need to get away from this madhouse, literally, and just have a few days of relaxation, just like eating good, relaxing, traveling a bit, and visiting a very nice city in Europe.
Yes, Budapest is a lovely, lovely city. I've been there a few times myself. The company I work for has an office there as well. It's a lovely city, and it's very picturesque.
Mm-hmm.
Are you into photography much?
Yeah. I like to take photos. I think in my bio in Twitter, I write something about tech and photography. In recent years, most of my photos have been from iPhones because they're just so, or the mobile device I use because it's just so convenient and it's there. But when I'm not using my iPhone or a mobile device, I have a Canon D90, which is quite good, and I bought it as a present for my wife, but she doesn't use it that much, so I take the opportunity and use it every often. Yeah.
That's very good. And so you like photography. Did you do much nighttime photography in Budapest?
A bit, yeah. They have like a night, very interesting night lighting in the buildings, and I think now that you mention it, I remember that there was one evening when we were next to one of the bridges, the two bridges that connect Buda and Pest, and there was a huge, like a flock of birds just going over the bridge. It was amazing, and in the time of the day, it was twilight. It was amazing. So yeah, I did take some photographs, and yeah, Budapest is lovely at night. Their statues and all of the cathedrals and monuments are very well lit. So it's, if you have a very good either stable arm or perhaps a Google Pixel 3 XL now, you can take amazing photographs there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also say in terms of night mode, Huawei's phones for the last few years have had an amazing night mode. It used to be that you'd do maybe a 28-second exposure using a mini tripod or something.
Mm-hmm.
But the new handheld night mode on Huawei's devices from the Huawei P20 Pro onwards is pretty amazing. Even on budget devices like the Honor 8X, you get good nighttime photography on a budget. So yeah. I'm really impressed by it. And more recently, in the last couple of weeks, the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, which Lukash and I are both reviewing. He purchased one after he saw how pretty it was.
Yeah, I think Huawei is one of the big Android manufacturers that really pushes a lot in terms of the camera functionality and quality. Are they still do they still use Leica in their cameras? So
yeah, they do. So the Leica branding, I have a case on mine at the moment, but the Huawei Mate 20 Pro that has been co-engineered with Leica, and it's a really impressive setup. I'm amazed by how good it is. Even they even now have a super macro mode, which allows you to take close-up pictures up to 2 centimeters away from your subject, which is amazing.
Yeah, sounds so. I'm just trying to imagine how amazing that would be with Google's ability in software, because I think that most Android vendors, and I have a very big respect for most of them, they invest a lot in the hardware, and I think this is remarkable, especially from the Chinese manufacturers, whether it's Huawei, Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus is doing some great things, even Xiaomi. But I think the software is still their Achilles heel for them, because they're still struggling. And I totally understand why it's hard. There was a very interesting article on The Verge a few weeks ago, on Android's 20-year anniversary, and 20 or 10. Perhaps I'm 20 years for Google, 10 years for Android. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Android is not that old. And it was a very interesting article saying how the Chinese manufacturers are actually re-engineering Android because they can't use all of Google services there. So they are actually taking the core Android or AOSP and then building on top of it. It's like a proper OS that they're building from the ground up almost. So yeah, I have understanding of why it's really hard for them, but still, software is where they could really improve. But not only Chinese. Samsung is in my list also a very big brand that can definitely improve their software skills.
Yes, there's a lot going on in that space. Obviously, Apple had a good head start. They started off more, and they spent a lot of resource on it before the results started showing. My understanding is that Apple currently has a team of around about 1,000 software engineers globally, working purely on the camera software for their smartphones. And it shows. It's a very tightly integrated setup with both their hardware and their software, and they're amongst the best camera smartphones out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, there's a lot of subjectivity on how you prefer your pictures to turn out. It's noticeable regionally. The sort of pictures that come out of certain devices optimized for Asian markets are significantly different from those made for Western markets. So we've gone past the technical, can we do it, to are we catering what we do to our customer bases, which is very interesting.
I totally agree. By the way, some of Apple's camera teams are sitting here in Israel, in Herzliya. We have it's a smallish city, not too far from Tel Aviv, and this is where the main Apple headquarters in Israel are sitting. And yeah, I think they have quite a very not too big, but a decent team here that is doing a lot of things for the camera modules. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that Apple had an office over there in Israel where they're doing engineering work. Is that because they acquired a local startup that they thought brought value to their business, or did they start that as a new office?
The former. They acquired a small startup called Anubit a few years ago. I think it was their first Israeli acquisition, and then since then they acquired 2 or 3 more companies. I forget the name of the company that did the camera for the Xbox.
Oh, the Microsoft Kinect.
Yeah, the Kinect. There is that company that had the basically hardware for the first Kinect is an Israeli company, and Apple bought them, and the result is Face ID. They just shrunk the entire mechanism into Face ID, and not too long ago, they also bought another company, a small startup here in Israel that had a very interesting technology for camera and facial recognition, and I think this resulted in emoji and memoji. So yeah, and after that, Apple scooped a lot of Texas Instrument engineers that were laid off, and they have quite a big presence here in Israel. 2 big offices, one in Herzliya and one up north in Haifa, which is more engineering oriented.
That's awesome. So yeah, that's great to hear that as well as other locations, they're also using Israel. because of the startup ecosystem there and the relatively well educated industry that there is there. As in, my understanding is that Israeli universities, technical universities, are producing world-class engineers.
Yeah. We have very three big universities here, which are engineering oriented. One is in Haifa. It's called the Technion. It's our local MIT. And the Technion is known globally for its quality in research and in engineering. I think they have a lot of collaborative work with even MIT and very big universities around the world. The second is Tel Aviv University, and the third is Beersheba University, which is located in the south. I studied in the Technion for some of my studying. So yeah, it's definitely high class, very, very hard there to study. I can vouch.
Very good. So let's go back to you. You mentioned that you travel for work mainly to Eastern Europe. You've been to London recently, and you travel for pleasure. What do you usually carry in terms of tech that makes your trips better? What's in your bag?
All right. So we definitely need to split up between my business travel and my pleasure travel. When I travel for pleasure, I usually don't take anything but my smartphone, perhaps some battery packs for the flights, and a camera if we remember to take it. That's it. Other than that, we just travel quite light without any electronics and any gadgets, because we try to avoid any of the hurdles of other electronics and distractions, just to be present in the vacation. But when I travel for business, it's a total different ballgame because I need to be connected and I need to work. My personal preference is to take my MacBook Pro with me as my main computer when I travel. That's even though that on work I have a PC, a Microsoft PC station, desktop station. But I don't know. My own preference is Mac OS, so I prefer to do everything through Mac OS. Most of the work that I do is I just need the browser mostly, because it's either mail or we're using a lot of software and management software like Jira and Confluence, all of the things by Atlassian, which, if you're a product manager, you probably know that, which is a plugin for our agile product management podcast.
Yes, hopefully they'll be sponsoring the Tech Travel Geeks and BYOD Podcast joint venture, which will be this week in agile and agile tooling.
Definitely. You have in a lot of podcasts, you hear podcasters saying how they love the tools that they're promoting. So I'm definitely a very big fan of Atlassian and their tools. I have some suggestions that they can improve, but definitely an avid user. So most of the things that I use are web things and web tools, and I can do most of the things through the browser. But if I really need, from some reason, to plug into my desktop computer, I can just do it from RDC, which sometimes can be flaky, but if the internet connection is good, then everything is good. Other than my MacBook Pro, I take my smartphone with me, several headphones, because usually when I'm traveling, I also do some sports. So I take my Powerbeats, which I use them for running and sports. I just find them the most convenient headphones for sports.
So, just to clarify, Powerbeats are part of Beats by Dr. Dre, owned by Apple?
Yeah, but I started using them even before Apple bought them. Not because, they had some issues with the sound, and I know that probably some people who are hearing us or viewing us saying, "What the hell are you doing?" They have like crappy headphones, but they really improved. And in my own personal taste, I found them to be the most convenient, not necessarily the best audio, but the hooks that they have, which just sit over your ear. Uh, to my taste, they're just the most convenient out there. All of those small headphones, earphones with those tips and wings and all kinds of birds parts. I don't know. They usually fall out of my ears when I'm running, so I don't like them that much. It's my ears are the problem here. It's not nothing else.
I'd say one of the biggest challenges for earphone and headphone makers is the vast diversity of ears and head shapes and sizes.
Definitely.
It's a big thing that adds to subjectivity, and in a way is a good thing that everyone's trying to solve, and there's still great diversity in the market.
Yeah, definitely.
So you say you carry multiple headphones when you travel. Do you have any that you prefer using on aircraft?
Oh yeah, I have two and I swap between them quite often. One is the Bose QC35 that I have, which are very convenient and very good for sound isolation. And I have another type, Sennheiser H45, if I'm not mistaken, which also have very good active noise cancellation, not as in par with Bose's, but they're quite good. And usually I'm taking the ones that I haven't forgotten at the office, and I have more at home. So definitely I have to have something for the airplane and also for the airport, because the noise is just annoying, and it's much nicer to fly and listen to something that you like and be isolated from the noise on the plane. Yeah. Can you repeat that, Matteo? I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. So headphones and audio are important when you're traveling. What do you listen to? Is it music, podcasts, audiobooks, a mix of the three?
I think a mix of the three. It depends. If I have some podcasts left on my queue, I would listen to them and finish all of them until the flight, during the flight, or whatever. If not, if I finished all the podcast, then my second tier would be some sort of music. Depending on, it varies. I have a very nice the CEO of the company which I work at. He's a music freak, and every few days he just comes to my desk and say, "You have to listen. I found this amazing new band, some cool groove." And so I have a lot of new music that I get all of the time, and I experience and experiment with it. If not, I just listen to what I have on device, because there's no Wi-Fi on the plane. And I rarely use audiobooks. I think I had only recently tried a few audiobooks, because I don't know why, but I prefer to actually read if I'm on the plane. Audiobooks are great idea and feature, especially if you're commuting, if you're driving. I think like podcasts, they're the best way, in my opinion. But luckily for me, my commutes to work are not that long. Usually it takes me about 30 to 45 minutes tops if there are some heavy traffic. So usually the podcast that I'm listening plug that commute quite good.
That's great. So obviously that's your mix of what you listen to in your headphones. What are your three services that you use? Where do you get most of your music? What's the service you use to get that?
Okay, so naturally, Apple Music is one of them, because it's there. And I think that Spotify only arrived to Israel a few months ago. It was only 6 months to a year. So Apple Music was in Israel from the get-go. And personally, don't tell Apple, but I have a US iTunes account. So
It's not like frequent listeners from the BYOD podcast don't know that already.
yeah. So I get the features that US Apple users have. So I had Apple Music from day one, basically, even before that arrived to Israel, which was quite fast either way. But Apple Music, because Spotify was absent here for quite a lot, and to use Spotify I needed to go through hoops, through all kinds of services, VPNs, etc., which made it a bit annoying. Nowadays I use Spotify also because they have a very, very good service. Definitely their curation is, I think, even better than Apple in some regards. And there are a lot of artists that I can find on Spotify and I can't find on Apple Music. Mostly small and indie artists. So this is it plugs in a lot of additional artists. And the thing is that Spotify is free, so I can use it without paying. So it enhances my music experience, and I don't need to pay for two services most of the time. That's it. I just use those two.
So, and how about podcasts? What service do you use or app do you use for those?
Oh, for podcasts, I use Overcast, which I've tried a few of those, a few podcast apps, Castro and Pocket Cast. But I don't know, something about Overcast simplicity and the fact that it's not, I don't know, it doesn't have any fancy features, which are not, they're nice, all of the Smart Boost and has a very nice features, but nothing is too fancy or too has a mental blockage on you need to start figuring how the queue works and how you add your podcast to your no, it's quite simple and quite easy to use, and I quite like it. And Marco Arment is doing a very nice job of iterating the UI and adding some new features. He had just added recently a very big update for the Apple Watch, or for support for the Apple Watch, which is quite nice. And yeah, this is my go-to podcast app.
Okay, and what's your if and when you listen to audiobooks, what service do you use for those?
Audible, from Amazon.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's no competition here.
Yeah, it's still probably the best service out there, especially now that they're starting to do originals and also the equivalent of podcasts, but more like investigative journalism or longer arc episodic content. So that's my preferred service for audiobooks and certain types of content. Well,
Yeah,
that's great to hear. So that's good. Right. So that's what you carry in your bag. You mentioned you carry an iPhone. What particular one are you using at the moment?
The iPhone 10, or as Greg likes to call it, the iPhone X.
Excellent.
Yeah, excellent.
So yes, we've had this conversation before, I believe, about calling it iPhone 10 or iPhone X. Yeah. I'm personally of the opinion it should be called iPhone X. So, and are you happy with the iPhone X? Are you tempted to upgrade to the XS or the XR or the XS Max?
Or any other X with actually no. So we talked about it at the BYOD, and this is the first year in a long time where I'm not tempted to upgrade. I've been an iPhone user since 2007. My first iPhone was smuggled to me from the US even before iPhones were available here in Israel, and I had to jailbreak it and do all kinds of stuff in order only to get it to work. And ever since, I had every iPhone other than the iPhone 3G, which I didn't believe was worth the upgrade because it had the same processor, the same screen, the same everything. The only difference was the GPS and the 3G connection. And here in Israel, it takes me back to the beginning when I said so-called startup nation, because even though we house a lot of tech companies and do a lot of the development of technology in the world, the infrastructure here in Israel is not as advanced as it should be when you consider all of the things that we actually develop here, like Face ID, and we have every big company has a headquarters here.
So do you think that issue with infrastructure is in any way related to from an infrastructure standpoint, a closeness to the US in terms of wireless standards?
I'm not sure, but look, the US, I think, is very advanced in terms of the infrastructure. Mobile payments are quite ubiquitous in the US, and I think also in the UK. Japan has like a huge head start over all of us in that regard. I used to work at a company in the beginning of the 2000s, in 2005, 6, and we were already developing chips for Japanese smartphones in order to do payments, mobile payments. So it was in those days already quite ubiquitous there. I don't know what is the reason or why, but we don't have a lot of the things that Western countries have, which annoys me a lot because we're developing it here in the country and we're not getting it as fast as you guys abroad have.
That's almost like Scotland and whiskey. It's cheaper and better abroad.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely we can't get a HomePod here in Israel. In fact, we don't have, even though we have a big Apple headquarters, we don't have any official Apple stores here. We have only retailers and certificate retailers and all kinds of premium resellers. But yeah, it is quite annoying.
Oh well, I'm sure that will change once demand ramps up. You'll eventually catch up, or maybe learn from our mistakes and skip the technological evolution bits, which are painful and useless.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll learn something, yeah.
So it's interesting you say that you're not tempted to upgrade. I originally wasn't tempted to upgrade my Pixel 2 XL, but then I ended up pre-ordering, and for the audio-only listeners, this rustling is me taking the plastic bag off the box to a Google Pixel 3 XL in black with hashtag Team Pixel. So the unboxing to our Pixel 3 XL at Tech Travel Geeks will be live on our YouTube channel in the next few hours. I have mixed feelings about the Google Pixel 3 XL. In a way, I'm not entirely happy with the pricing. It's a very expensive device. I'm not sure if the quality and the actual benefits of it are that big at the moment, but we'll need to see. Maybe that night mode in the camera will blow me away. Maybe the battery life and the industrial design will win me over. But especially after the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, it will be difficult to win me over. We'll see what happens.
But Huawei devices, the Mate 20 Pro, is not also that cheap, right?
It's not that cheap, but it has a wow factor in the Twilight SKU, or stock keeping unit. That Twilight color is truly astonishing. Mm-hmm. The industrial design with the curved screen, the little red button, is gorgeous. And it feels very nice to hold, despite having a massive 4,200 milliamp hour battery. Mm-hmm. And that camera to me is really, really important. I've discussed this before, both on the Tech Travel Geeks podcast, but also on Miriam Joire's podcast, the Mobile Tech Podcast. I think there's a difference in philosophy in terms of how photography is tackled in these smartphones. So companies like Samsung and Huawei, they decide what the scene is before they take the picture. So they set everything up and then take the picture. Whereas Google seems to be taking multiple pictures, multiple exposures, putting them together, and then figuring it out afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think that's Apple are more in the sort of Huawei, Samsung camp of figuring it out before you take the picture, then taking the picture, and that's it. What do you think, Nati?
I think Apple is somewhere in between, especially this year when they started to do more computational photography. Up until this year, I would definitely say that you are right, and they're using more of the hardware, whether it's the camera hardware itself or the ISP for the processing on real time or near real time. And the way that it shows is that usually the photo that you're seeing on your iPhone screen is the one that you're going to get post when you press the shutter button. But Google, yeah, it's something different. But this year, I think Apple has taken a very big step into computational photography because they understood that Google has a very big head start on them, and they can do a lot of things with software. And Apple really is a software company. They use the hardware, but what makes them differentiate from anything else is the software and that tight integration. So they used to be very reliant on hardware, but this year things have taken like a different path.
Yes, that's a great explanation. Thanks for that. For a bit of context for the Tech Travel Geeks podcast listeners, Nati is a co-host on the BYOD podcast, which by, I believe your own definition is you, on the BYOD podcast, you walk that fine line between being Apple fanboys and generic technology enthusiasts. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that's the term Greg coined, and I think the way that we managed to do that to be slightly, hopefully, objective, is that the fact that we are both looking from like the products themselves, and if there are things that we like, we just say it out loud, and if there's things that we don't like, no matter from which company it is, we just say our opinions without being too captured in the notion of okay, I'm an Apple user, so I have to defend Apple in for anything that they do. No, that's not how I believe things should be. Not to tell people how to act, basically, but I think the best way is to try to be objective, and even if you like some company, acknowledge the wrong thing that they're doing. It's not there's nothing bad about it.
Speaking of acknowledging mistakes and wrong things that are happening in the world of technology, one thing that I think we should mention on this podcast is the recent scandal engulfing Google. And I know you're involved in that as well.
Which one?
I would say the main one, the one that was reported in the New York Times late last week, about a certain culture of leniency towards executives that had performed or behaved in a very inappropriate manner, and the ways Google distance themselves from the company, distance those executives from the company without actually admitting to any wrongdoing and getting rid of them that way. As a result, today, Google, a company of many thousands of employees, many of those employees staged a walkout. And I think it's admirable that such a big movement from within the company has happened. I think the senior leadership will take notice and make sure that that never happens again. I think it's a terrible thing that happened. If the reports in the New York Times are true, it puts Google into a different perspective for me personally.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I really like Google as a company. Their products that they do. I think that what a lot of people look at Google as a service company and they're just doing services, but Google is a really focused product company. And I think Ben Thompson has a very, very keen observation by saying that Google, from the get go, won by being the best and what they do. So they really invest in being the best. Obviously, they in some areas they're not the best, like in hardware, because they're newbies at it, or it's not their core competency, even though they had multiple trials there. But they really strive to have the best product experience that they, or the technology that they can bring, whether it's search, mail, maps, whatever. They really rode on a very good wave of using their search into pushing a lot of adjacent services and leveraging it. And the thing that I don't like about Google is their company's culture. I don't know why, but there's something in their culture that gets me off. I couldn't put my hand on it, my finger on it up until now. But all of these stories that now bubble up, they don't surprise me. Um, a company that has a motto of "do no evil," and then they remove it, and they do all kinds of things that for privacy, the way that they change their opinions about net neutrality because of Verizon, their connection with Verizon. I don't know, something about their values is not that strong. And even though they have very good products, I don't believe that Google is a company that has very strong values. Look, every company has its good side and bad side. Apple is no saint, definitely. No company is a saint, but I think you can judge by which company has the better values in the industry. And I think that I don't know. I think Microsoft under Satya Nadella is one of those. I think Nadella is a great CEO and has a lot of very good values which he tries to implement in Microsoft and incorporate it. Apple is one of those, a company when the CEO tells investors that he wants to do things for to have a green company, and if they don't like it, then they can just find another stock. This is powerful, and it shows very big values. Yeah, and Google isn't. I don't perceive them as such a company, even though I use their services and they have amazing products in some regards.
Yes, especially in the travel space, I'd say Google has some amazing products from
Oh, definitely.
Google Flights to Google Maps. Google Maps, which obviously benefited from the acquisition of an Israeli company,
Hmm.
Waze. There's a lot going on in the travel space, as well as integrating all the other services they have into solving users' problems whilst they're traveling, or just before, or at the right moment relating to travel. I
Oh,
personally
definitely.
use Gmail. I use Google Trips. I've been using Google Flights. I use Google Maps regularly,
Hmm.
and it's it's an amazing stack of diverse services that come together nicely under the Google umbrella. It makes traveling for me very, very easy. For example, in
Oh,
a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to China. I would not be confident going to China without Google Flights uh, with offline translation on my smartphone.
hmm, yeah.
It's not perfect, but for example, last time I was in China, there was four of us at dinner. We were trying to order via Google Translate. The waitress replied to us via voice. The translation picked it up as, well, if you are 24 small peasants, it's 24. We said, okay, whatever. And then 24 trays of dim sum arrived. So we were very we were very full at the end of it.
Yes, sounds like China. I've been to China when I traveled after the army, and before there were smartphones and everything. And the only thing that helped us that was a Lonely Planet guidebook and some some Chinese phrases at the back of the book, which we tried to use. And what I've learned is that in China, it is probably one of the only countries in the world where you do something like puck, 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 they don't understand that it's chicken.
No, chicken is strictly a food in China.
Yeah, definitely. So I totally understand. By the way, Google Maps works in China. I'm
No, as far as I know, it does, but it's very out of date. It's not the Google Maps we know in outside of China.
Okay, yeah.
But it does exist. For me, the biggest thing for my upcoming trip to China is Google Translate, and the fact that I can catch the Chinese language, I can cache Mandarin on the device, even without an internet connection. I will have translation and voice translation on my smartphone.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I agree. Google services are superb. As I said, when we traveled to Budapest, we used only the public transportation and only with Google Maps, and it was smooth. And it was like every time we wanted to go to some place, the map directions took us through which bus or tram or subway or whatever we needed to take, with very precise, with the right times when the bus is about to come, how long we need to walk to get there. It was very, very convenient, and I don't think I could manage that easily in a foreign city without Google Maps. And yeah, Apple Maps is not as good as Google Maps, no matter what they'll do, at least not for now. However, in London, Apple Maps was a very good experience. When I was there, I used the watch and AirPods, and it was like going and managing the streets as if I am somebody local. You couldn't actually see me as a tourist, because I just walked and I got directions and slide taps on my wrist. But the experience is not there. It's not the same globally. London, I think, is one of the few cities that Apple Maps excels at, and here in Israel, it's like a mixed a mixed experience, definitely.
Very good. So okay, we've talked about a bit about you, about your travels. We've gone off on a little bit of a tangent talking about products. Is there anything else you'd like to shout out about, apart from BYOD Podcast, which you can find wherever you find good podcasts? Any other initiatives or things you'd like to shout out about?
No, not at the moment. I'm thinking to restart a small blog that I had invented or adopted, which I neglected in a almost criminal way in the last year or so. But we'll see if I have the time. Not sure, but I write and talk about tech. This is something that I have a lot of thoughts about and opinions, obviously.
Very good. And obviously, people can follow you on Twitter as Nati Show. That's NATISHO. Anywhere else people can follow you on social media or on the internet?
No, I have a very small Instagram account, which I don't follow that many, and I don't use Facebook. And I think Google Plus is about to be closed off. So no, just
It's
Twitter.
sad. Google Plus does still exist, but not for long. Sadly, rest in peace. It had so much potential, but it was one of those places Google failed.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you very much for joining us, Nati.
Sure.
Thank you to our listeners and watchers on YouTube. You can watch our episodes live on YouTube, but also after the fact. We will then edit this video audio and release it as an audio podcast, which you can subscribe to anywhere you get your podcasts. Places such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Stitcher, etc. And you can also follow Tech Travel Geeks on Twitter at Tech Travel Geeks. myself, Todoleo, Todoleo, and our website, techtravelgeeks.com. So thank you again for listening or watching. Thank you, Nati, for joining us. And
Thank you for having me.
good night, everyone. Bye-bye.